After his wife is taken by an illegal trader, an ordinary cook recruits a helper and together they become superheroes to rescue the woman. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Super, from 2010. After a complicated childhood and adolescence, Frank and Sarah met as adults and married shortly afterwards. As time goes by, the man feels his wife becoming more and more distant, and catches her using illegal substances a few times, but even so, Frank doesn't take any action and just lets things unfold. One day, he's cooking some eggs for breakfast when a stranger called Jacques arrives looking for his wife. Since Sarah isn't there, the guy invites himself to breakfast and eats all the eggs, then leaves. 5 days later, Sarah leaves and takes all her things from the apartment, leaving Frank totally alone. Refusing to accept, the man goes to Jacques' company and asks if he has seen her. When confronted by her husband, Jacques tells him that he knows where she is, but that Sarah doesn't want to have any more contact with Frank. Thinking he is lying, the cook goes to the police station and accuses Jacques of having taken his wife, but the detective soon realizes that she has abandoned her husband and asks him to get over it. Thinking of a way to distract himself, Frank goes to a pet shop and starts looking at some rabbits to adopt, but after a while he gives up and leaves. At home, Frank goes in front of the TV and starts changing channels until he finds a program about the Holy Avenger, a Christian superhero who uses the power of Jesus to fight against the influence of the devil on young people. Seeing the bravery of the avenging saint, Frank decides that he too will face evil and tries to talk to Jacques again, catching the moment when Sarah gets into his car. Wanting to get his wife back, Frank uses his own car to block the way and rushes into the back seat to rescue his wife, but contrary to what he imagined, Sarah refuses to go and struggles to get back into the car. To get her attention, the man starts banging on the windshield and Jacques gets out of the vehicle very angry, telling him never to touch his car again. Feeling challenged, Frank starts tapping the hood with his index finger and Jacques decides to just drive off, but the husband is still in a state of denial and throws himself onto the windshield. Tired of the situation, Jacques' security guards pull Frank off the car and start beating him while Sarah watches from her new boyfriend's vehicle. Completely defeated, Frank goes home and begins to pray, asking God what he should do. But he is apparently ignored and goes to bed still not knowing what to do. While turning from side to side in bed, the man sees a figure passing by the window and gets up to see what it is, discovering that the avenging saint is in his backyard. Suddenly, the ceiling starts to open up and the sheet wraps around Frank's arms, preventing him from moving. As if that wasn't crazy enough, tentacles come out of the walls and cut Frank's head open while he's still awake, leaving his brain exposed. At that moment, one last tentacle dries up the blood and the god's index finger appears to touch the human's brain, releasing shockwaves that spread through his head and causing him to end up in a white room where he meets the Holy Avenger. There, the Christian superhero does everything he can to encourage Frank to fight against injustice and then returns him to Earth. Back in reality, the paranoid cook goes to the comic book store and starts looking around for something. Realizing that he needs help, the saleswoman Libby asks if she can help and Frank replies that he wants the Holy Avenger magazines. After pointing out to him where the comics are, Libby says she knows Frank and tells him that she always has lunch at the diner where he works as a cook, but the man says he doesn't remember her. Even without powers, Frank is determined to fight evil and goes home to make his own uniform, as well as adopting the name Crimson Bolt. With everything ready, the superhero takes to the streets and hides behind a dumpster waiting for something to happen, but after 2 long nights, he witnesses no crime. Tired of waiting, Frank disguises himself as a university student and goes to the library saying he wants to do a paper on where to buy illegal substances. He manages to convince the librarian to do some research and discover the street where the illegal traders usually hang out. Wanting to stop the crime, Frank goes to the scene and attacks one of the vendors who is negotiating with 2 young men. At first, Crimson even manages to take down the shopkeeper, but without powers and unarmed, he ends up taking the worst of it and gets hit with the lid of a garbage can, being forced to run before more criminals arrive to help. After fleeing, the failed hero returns to the comic book store and asks Libby to show him some comics of superheroes without powers. Curious, the girl asks what he needs the comics for and Frank replies that he's creating his own superhero, but hasn't thought of a weapon to use yet. Thinking he's looking for inspiration to write a comic book, Libby says that's very cool and recommends he read Batman or Hawkeye stories. After the comic book store, Frank returns home and ends up choosing a pipe wrench as a weapon, using the object to return to Euclid Street and smash in the skull of the illegal trader from the day before. With the new weapon, he begins to move around the city and uses the wrench to take down all kinds of criminals. Feeling that he is ready, Frank goes to Jacques' office and sees Sarah completely out of her mind being taken to the car, deciding that he will follow the vehicle until he finds out where she is being held. After some time on the road, He finally arrives outside Jacques' house, but without a plan, he decides to just go back to work while he thinks about what to do. The next morning, Frank goes to the movies to pass the time and catches a man trying to skip the line. Disgusted, the cook asks him to take his place and the stranger starts swearing at him, telling Frank to mind his own business. Outraged, the man goes to the trunk of the car and takes the costume, dressing up as Crimson Bolt and hitting the stranger in the face with a griffin key, as well as knocking out a woman who tries to stop him. After hitting them both, the superhero runs to his car and goes back to work, but it's not long before his crazy antics hit the headlines and Libby shows up at the diner to talk about it. There, the girl says that someone has finally become a hero and asks if it is he who is behind the mask. Frightened, Frank denies being Crimson and rushes home to get rid of his uniform, but just as the cook takes his clothes out of the cupboard, the detective appears at the door asking him to come in and have a chat. Even though he's scared, Frank lets the policeman in, but he can't act normal and starts looking at the cupboard nonstop, which makes the detective very suspicious. Curious, he asks if it's a basement and the cook replies that it's just the cupboard where his dog is kept. Finding it all very strange, the policeman tries to ignore it and asks for his signature to cancel last week's reports, then leaves. Finally alone, Frank begins to throw everything into a bag and prays again, asking God if he should really continue as Crimson Bolt, but again he is ignored. Thinking that this is a sign to throw everything away, Frank leaves his things in the garbage can and goes back to living his life as normal. But that's only until he sees another episode of The Holy Avenger talking about Jesus summoning people to do what's right. As soon as he hears this, Frank thinks it's a sign from God and decides to take the uniform back from the dumpster, going to Jacques' house straight away. There, the bumbling hero jumps over the wall and sneaks in through the window, catching the exact moment when Jacques' men are loading the illegal goods. On the sofa at the back, Frank sees another guy applying substances to Sarah's vein and begins to hallucinate that they are all demons trying to trick his wife. To keep everyone away, the genius comes up with the idea of throwing the pipe wrench out of the window and challenges everyone to a fight. But obviously the criminals are armed and start shooting while he runs. As he's jumping over the wall, Frank ends up being hit in the leg and falls outside, but he still manages to escape alive and decides to go to Libby's house, where a party is taking place. Wanting to hide his costume, Frank wraps himself in garbage bags and asks to talk in private, showing the wound on his leg and asking for help. Even though she's surprised that he's Crimson Bolt, the girl manages to stay calm and tells him that they can't go to the hospital, because they'll definitely call the police when they see the bullet wound. Afraid of someone finding out about it, the girl kicks everyone out of the party and starts treating the wound herself, pouring a whole bottle of alcohol on it. While he's bandaging up, Libby asks if anyone else knows about the hero's true identity and he replies that Jacques' men probably know too, which forces him to stay hidden until it's all over. At the police station, the detective is making a report when he sees Crimson Bolt's portrait in the headline and finally realizes that this is Frank, deciding to pay another visit. Even though the house is empty, the policeman enters and goes straight to the cupboard to see what he's hiding, but as the costume is with Frank, he can't find anything at all. Frustrated, the policeman turns to leave the house and ends up being surprised by Jacques' men, who mistake him for Frank and start shooting. After several shots, the criminals realize they've eliminated the wrong person and approach to see who it is, discovering that they've just eliminated a policeman. On the other side of town, Libby demonstrates all her combat skills and offers to be Crimson's sidekick, suggesting that her secret identity is Bolt. With her costume ready, the girl says it's time to go after Jacques and Frank replies that it's not yet, but Libby still insists that they should fight and the hero decides to take her out into the street to wait for a crime to happen. After hours of waiting, nothing happens and Bolt starts to get bored, suggesting they go after Jerry, a guy who scratched her best friend's car. Together, the two go to the man's house and begin their revenge, but while the hero fights Jerry, Libby loses control and smashes a glass vase over the man's head, then tries to smash his head with a statue. Luckily, Frank manages to stop her and the two leave the house in a hurry, but they argue the whole way. In the middle of the journey, the vehicle they are in runs out of fuel and they stop at the gas station to fill up, when they run into two of Jacques' men. As soon as he sees the pair of criminals, the masked cook tries to run back to his car, but ends up being pulled out. Seeing that they are armed, Frank gets up and runs through the streets as far as he can, but is soon caught by the pair of criminals who start beating him up. After a few blows, one of the men finally decides to eliminate him and pulls out his pistol, but just as he is about to fire, he ends up being hit by Bolt, who uses the car to smash his legs against the wall. Now that the gun is on the ground, Bolt picks it up and aims it at the other criminal's chest, hitting him in front of the crowd. With both of them suffering, Frank puts Libby back in the car and drives to the safe house, where they begin the final preparations before facing Jacques. Almost ready for the final fight, The two go to a gun store and fill their trolley with weapons and ammunition, as well as practicing their shots on the firing range. On the day of Sarah's rescue, Frank builds some homemade bombs and a type of super powerful throwable hidden blade. With everything ready, the two of them start guarding the outside of the house at the exact moment when a big buyer arrives to close a $1 million deal, which is quite bad, since there are now even more security guards in place. Inside the house, the buyer shows the suitcase full of money and asks to spend some time with Sarah while Jacques prepares the product. Even in a daze, the woman says she doesn't want to go and asks for Jacques' help, but he doesn't mind at all and allows the stranger to take her. Outside, Crimson hides behind a bush and attracts the attention of one of the security guards so that Bolt jumps on his back and finishes him off with her claws. With other men outside, Frank sets a trap and manages to set fire to the body of one of them, finishing him off with a few stab wounds before he alerts the others with screams. With two guards down, Libby decides to be a little more radical and finishes off the third with a banana of dynamite that blows him to bits, but obviously everyone inside the house hears the noise and goes outside to shoot at the pair of heroes in the bushes. Luckily, Frank is hit in the vest and comes out completely unscathed, but when he goes to talk to his sidekick to see if she's okay, he realizes that Bolt Girl has taken a lethal shot and had her brains blown out. Furious, Crimson stands up with two lit dynamites and throws them into the middle of the bandits, blowing up 3 of them at once. Not satisfied, Frank continues to advance while shooting everyone he comes across, managing to eliminate the guards outside. Once inside the house, the buyer realizes that Crimson Bolt is coming and orders his men to guard everything, giving up the negotiation and walking towards the door. But Jacques refuses to allow him to leave and finishes him off with a shot, hitting his security guards shortly afterwards. With Crimson about to enter through the roof, Jacques takes the suitcase of money and goes after Sarah while his last men wait to finish off the hero. Suddenly, something falls near a window and the henchmen start shooting, but it was just a distraction and Frank manages to catch both of them off guard, hitting one with his gun and getting into a fight with the other. After smashing the gangster's head against the floor, Crimson starts calling for Sarah and Jacques throws her over his feet, saying that he has won and can take her. Happy to be reunited with his beloved, Frank ends up letting his guard down and Jacques takes the opportunity to draw his gun and fire 2 shots into the cook's arm. With Crimson stunned by the pain, Jacques feels victorious and begins to humiliate him, but ends up getting too close and enters the range of the hidden blade, which flies with everything and hits him right in the lower parts. Now that the villain is down, Crimson talks about all the evil he's done and Jacques asks if his perishment will make the world a better place. With a thirst for revenge, Frank replies that that's what he's going to find out and strikes Jacques several times, carrying Sarah in his arms to the car afterwards. Now that it's all over, Frank drives home and lives life with Sarah for a while, but after a few months, she tires of it all and decides to move on, leaving to finish her studies. After a few more years, Sarah finishes college and gets married, having 4 children and forming a happy family. Far away from them, Frank finally decided to adopt a rabbit and lives the rest of his days looking after the new animal, as well as being sure that he has made the world a better place. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.